Welcome to the History Hotline, a direct line to a better understanding of all things Black history and beyond. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 145 of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lynn Cook and as always I'll be your host today. Now this episode will be reaching your ears on October 1st if you listen on the day it releases, which means it's Black History Month. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Basically nothing has changed over here because it's Black History Month every day at the History Hotline. I thought about doing an episode about things I hate about Black History Month, as I typically do. But I feel like I've done that a few times now, and nothing has really changed. The things I hated about Black History Month in 2020, 2021, 2 and 3 still remain in 2024. So no need for a real update on that. If you are new around here, you might want to go back. You might want to listen to me ranting about Black History Month in iterations of my past self. If that is at all interesting to you, then episode 6 and episode 50 are where you need to go. I realise I'm building quite a catalogue of episodes. 145, that's a lot of content, a lot of me yapping. But episode 6 and 50, if I remember rightly, I think 6 especially, I really enjoyed making it. I think especially back then, I was only 2 or 3 months into podcasting, which meant that kind of all the opportunities that were coming to me, like, oh, can you do a talk here? And can you like be involved in this thing? And can you do this Black History Month thing? Can you make this content and talk here and do this and do that? It was all quite new to me. It was somewhat of a novelty. But I was already kind of understanding and seeing some of the issues, especially in 2020, where we've just come off of this moment where everybody's thinking about racial equality following the murder of George Floyd and then the subsequent protests and the kind of global movement that followed, as you are probably all aware. So yeah, episode 6 especially is quite raw. It's coming out of 2020 in that moment, so an interesting listen. I wanted to talk today, because I'm not going to talk about Black History Month, that's it now, that's the end. It's also, October 1st is also Nigeria's Independence Day, which I just feel like must be annoying because, like, I guess especially for maybe British Nigerians, I guess you can kind of celebrate the two things in one, if you celebrate. Outside of being in Britain, then Black History Month is only a British thing in October, so it's not like people in Nigeria are going to be like, oh my gosh, like Nigerian Independence Day is clashing with Black History Month in Britain. But actually, Independence Day is such a good day, whatever country you're from, to kind of celebrate heritage, to celebrate the country, to celebrate your nation, to be really proud of that. And maybe actually it is actually not a bad thing, but something special that it coincides with the day that Britain decided it would, well, not actually Britain, you know, people in Britain, Black people in Britain, specifically Akaiba Adai-Sebo, who was a Ghanaian refugee who came to Britain in 1984, and by 1987 had seen the need for a kind of a push on education when it came to Black history for children especially, hence it being in October towards the start of the school year where it's kind of an easier time to implement something new and for children to learn something fresh, obviously differing from the US's February start. But yeah, I guess it happening on the same day as Nigerian Independence Day calls for, in some cases, a double celebration of all Nigerian culture in Britain and how that's shaping British cultural landscape and what we define to be as Black British. But also, you know, as much as I speak negatively about Black History Month, and will continue to do forever as long as I shall ever live, and as long as this thing shall be known as the month of October, being Black History Month, I do think that because everybody does kind of turn up for it, there is so much by way of opportunities to learn more about Black British history, without getting into the pet peeves of me hating when African American history is prioritised at this time over Black British history. There are so many events coming up. There are so many talks. There are so many, even within the corporate spaces, I see people having kind of heritage-based lunch and learns, whether they're historical, whether they're focusing on, a specific cuisine of food. The celebration is somewhat there. A lot of it is heavily commercialized and corporate. I said I wasn't going to get into the problems of it, so I'll stop talking there, except to say that actually, coincidentally, that it's Black History Month. This isn't a Black History Month event, but I do have another live show, essentially, with author Colin Douglas, who wrote The Caribbean and the Second World War, and we will be talking about just that, the Caribbean and the Second World War, as part of the Imperial War Museum's live podcast festival on the 19th of October 2024, which is literally 19 days away. I can't believe it. It's come around so quickly. Tickets are available online. I will put the link in the show notes. They're also available on our social media platforms. They're linked everywhere. So if you would like to come to that, it's in collaboration with the publisher Lawrence Wishart, who published Colin's book, and it's going to be a great conversation between myself and Colin, thinking about the kind of longer history of the military presence and kind of contribution, the Caribbean's contribution to British armed forces, all the way back to the 18th century to the present day. We're going to be, really expanding this. So come along if that interests you at all. There are also other podcasts that will be doing live shows on that day that are all to do with military history. So if that's a bit of your bag, then come along to the Imperial War Museum. Now for today's topic. I really thought I was done with the Has Things Changed theme of 2 episodes ago, the kind of 3-part little mini-series thing where I was like, policing, has things changed? Policing the carnival, have things changed? The far right, have things changed? But here I am again to ask the question, has things changed? And the context of today's question comes from the fact that teachers, specifically in this case from Jamaica, are being brought over to Britain to fill the quota for teachers in British schools. It's ringing Windrush bells. It's giving Windrush. It's giving 1948. It's giving the education department, landing on Caribbean soil to say we need workers. And it's giving Caribbean people saying, sure, we'll come along. Unfortunately, the situation for them once they get here is, well, as expected, because I said, have things changed? In the context of pay, they have not, unfortunately. Now, there's maybe a little bit more nuance to the pay situation than there was in the 1950s and 60s, where Caribbean people typically saw themselves in the same types of work, in the same jobs, being paid less, or not being able to access higher levels of employment despite their training and ability and professional experiences. Now, in this case, it's the fact that a story broke, actually tweeted by Diane Abbott, MP for Hackney and Stoke Newington. Is that the area, I think? Yes, Hackney, North and Stoke Newington. Diane Abbott tweeted, and I quote, "Bringing Jamaican teachers to the UK but underpaying them mirrors the Windrush years, where Jamaican nurses were exploited in exactly the same way, and so were the teachers, I believe." And then she tweeted an article from The Guardian, which is of great interest to me. It's something I've been hearing about for a while now, and I can't remember if I spoke about it on this podcast before, but I don't think I did. I think I was actually just having a conversation with a person. You know what, with podcasting, sometimes I forget what I've actually said here and what I've just said in conversation with somebody else, especially now having done this for quite some time. Anyway, in particular, the academy trust that is coming into question is the Harris Federation, and it's England's second largest academy chain with 54 state-funded schools as a part of it. Now, academies are they're kind of like local authorities. They do the job of what local authorities used to do, but under the Conservative government, they brought in academy trusts, and all schools had to become an academy, and then they would be underneath this kind of umbrella of schools. So in this case, it's a Harris Academies, but under the Harris Federation, there's groups like ARC, there's in Birmingham, there's the King Edward's group who seem to be swallowing schools. So yeah, there's different federations and kind of, I guess, I'm going to call them umbrellas, for want of a more accurate term, umbrellas that fund, in a way, not fund per se, because the schools actually have to pay them to be a part of their federation, the trust. So the schools pay them in the way that they would have paid the local authorities. What they pay in some cases is less than what they would have paid the local authorities, which is how some of these trusts are justifying themselves. And with that, they get support. They might have to streamline themselves. They might have to fit into what the federation is already kind of trying to do, their ethos, their standards, potentially their curriculum as well. And so schools that previously weren't academies had to kind of decide which federation or which trust they wanted to be a part of. Some schools, and I say the schools that might have been not doing so well, would probably not get the choice. They might just have to go with who will take them. Whereas better performing schools might be able to dictate. And also in the case of like the King Edward schools, they became the federation, the trust, in a sense. Don't need to get too bogged down into the details of that, because we're thinking about the Jamaican teachers at the moment. And the case with the Jamaican teachers, specifically in this Harris Federation, which is detailed in this article. The article is written by Warwick Mansell, came out on Saturday, the 28th of September. I'll leave it in the show notes in case anybody wants to read it or learn any more about this. But essentially, Harris have been recruiting teachers from Jamaica using a company called Hourglass Education, which also flies the staff out to do interviews. So everything happens in Jamaica. And Jamaican teachers have arrived in Britain and realised that they are not being paid the same as other teachers, British born, gone through the British system teachers. And part of this is because they are deemed quote unquote unqualified teachers, and the pay scale for unqualified teachers is different for those that are qualified. And to be qualified, you'd have to have done a PGCE or like a teach first kind of qualification that gives you that status as a qualified teacher. It's sometimes it's more classroom based, more hands-on, and the learning is kind of done that way, and sometimes it's more theory based and based in a university like a PGCE. Now, this is not to say that they are hiring teachers from Jamaica that are like unqualified by way of having no experience and, you know, haven't been a teacher before. They are, but the qualification in England is specific to England. It's called QTS, Qualified Teacher Status, I believe, and it means then you can kind of jump into a higher pay grade because you have that. And a lot of schools in Britain, you would have to be, there's a differentiation when you're unqualified and when you have QTS. I worked as an unqualified teacher, and everything is not everything is different. It's not a bad thing. You just haven't got that qualification, and so there's often there's more support given to you as a teacher. You are not paid the same, as you shouldn't be, because you don't have the qualification. But the issue with the Jamaican teachers that are coming over is that the fact that the schools should be giving them the opportunity to take up this qualification within a year of them arriving, but they haven't been. And there was a lack of transparency from the agency Hourglass, where the teachers that were interviewed in this article, I said the article's from The Guardian, my apologies, it is on the Guardian website, but it's from The Observer. And the teachers that spoke to The Observer said that they weren't told that it would take a much longer time for them, over a year essentially, for them to move off the unqualified teacher pay scale towards gaining the qualified teacher status, the QTS. There has been in the past fast track, and I think currently a fast track system for teachers to gain QTS, because essentially you are quote unquote a better teacher, you're a more qualified teacher, you've had to think about your practice, your pedagogy, you've gone through training that should mean you're a better teacher. And so it's in the interest of our students and of other teachers within the school and the teachers themselves to be put through this training as soon as possible. But this wasn't the case within the Harris Federation, and it's created this now racialized level of inequality between these teachers arriving from Jamaica who are held down on a lower rank, just like when the nurses came over. And maybe this is the point that Diane Abbott's making in her tweet, actually, that kind of went straight over my head. The idea that they were held on an SEN role, which is a state enrolled nurse, as opposed to being a state registered nurse, an SRN, which would then mean that they could progress because that was a qualification you needed to get into management and get into higher positions as a nurse in the NHS. But they were kept on SEN contracts. That's how they were trained. That was the highest level of training that they were offered. And even when they went in expecting to have the SRN status and train to that level, they weren't allowed it in some cases, or they had to fight really hard to get it. It was like a not a secret, but a whisper that Caribbean nurses and black nurses would say to each other, like, make sure they let you get your SRN, like, don't let them push you into the SEN route, kind of thing. So it's quite interesting, I guess, that the same thing is happening, even down to that level of withholding a qualification, is happening now in 2024 in Britain with the same kind of people, young women arriving in this country. Not always women, not all teachers are women. Wow, my bias is showing. But a lot of them might be women. Although actually in the article, it's assuming they've kept the genders the same. They've removed the names. It is someone known as Michael who is interviewed. So not just women. My apologies. My bias is showing for sure. In the article, the Harris Federation did give comment and said that they no longer work with Hourglass Education. They don't use them any longer, essentially potentially passing blame to them to suggest that it was their fault for not explaining the situation properly, and maybe not telling them that they wouldn't be moving beyond the QTS status. I don't know what the reason is. It's not listed. That's just an assumption. However, it's just very interesting as well. And maybe it's the time to say it here, and it's also noted in the article. But something I think about a lot with these Academy Trust federations is how much their CEOs or the heads of these companies are paid. And in this case, it's a man called Sir Daniel Moynihan. I might have pronounced his surname wrong. Apologies if I have. The chief executive of Harris, and he's paid between $485,000 and $490,000 a year, so very close to $500,000. And the executives below, 7 of them are paid at least £190,000. Now, in this cost of living crisis, where you have Jamaican teachers arriving in this country being held in teaching statuses that mean that they can not earn the level that they should and their peers are earning, whilst, and I will say as an unqualified teacher, you still have to teach the lessons. It's not like there's someone in there with you, watching you, helping you. You still have to do the work. You just don't have the same level of training. Living essentially in London, because Harris is, I think, London and Essex, schools in London and Essex, so they're living probably in the most expensive part of the country, and they are dealing with the cost of living crisis like we all are, and they are being essentially underpaid, and I doubt that they don't want to train or they don't want to take this qualification on, because why wouldn't you? It's more money, and the school typically supports you through that as well. It's not like a massive undertaking to do that, especially knowing the payout afterwards. Now, there are some tax breaks that newly arrived individuals get when they come to this country. There's an exemption from income tax for their first 2 years living in England, and so they probably, and it's noted in the article, that they might not have understood or they might not have realised the difference, because take-home pay differences wouldn't have been so stark to their colleagues because they have that income tax exemption that their colleagues obviously wouldn't have had. I think it's only until maybe that time is up and they have to then start paying income tax, which in an ideal system, there's 2 years of having no income tax, then getting your QTS status and your pay going up, and then you're contributing to society through paying tax, should balance it out. And it should be something that makes more of an incentive for people to get that QTS status and be given it quickly, especially the schools knowing the system. But that wasn't the case. And I just, to go back to this man's salary, £500,000, £500,000, and your teachers are not being paid what they should, is not good. It's simply not good. It's appalling. It's terrible. And, this federation recruited more than 150 teachers from Jamaica since 2018. So in the last 6 years, 150 teachers potentially have gone through the situation of being underpaid and being held in this kind of lower rung of teaching status. It also speaks to the fact that people don't want to be teachers anymore. I wonder why. And I think it's something that comes up like every now and again as a conversation, the shortage of teachers in this country and the amount of people leaving the profession in droves. And I really do think the government, as new as they are, really need to think about incentivizing teaching a little bit more, and maybe paying teachers would be a good start, because, do you know what I mean? I think people might be able to tolerate things if they felt they were being adequately compensated. But unfortunately, that's not yet seen to be something that this new government have done much about. I'm sure they have made comments, I think, on some of the professions that have been striking, and obviously, given the pay rises where they have chosen to. But it will be interesting to see what they do with education as time goes on, and the fact that as a country, as a nation, as a Britain, we're still relying on overseas talent to prop up some of the core services of British society, whilst at the same time you have people in government fixing their lips with racist rhetoric about immigrants, marching on the streets, suggesting that immigrants are the problem in this country, when actually they're still solving so many problems in this country, is crazy to me. Professor Gus John put out an article a few weeks ago, I believe, about the situation where Jamaican teachers are coming to Britain. And he asked the all-important question, well, who's teaching the Jamaican children in Jamaica then? And again, this, lure of Britain. And of course, I wouldn't begrudge anyone that takes up the opportunity to live here for all its privileges. There are many in comparison to potentially staying in Jamaica. But it's an important question. And it seems time and time again, Britain are happy to just exploit people for their own societal benefits, not thinking about, the countries that these people are moving from. As they didn't think about it in the 50s and 60s, they continue to not think about it in the 2020s. Now, interestingly, and even more funny, but not funny, haha. Funnily enough, it is also a breaking news story that the Home Office, the wonderful Home Office, has attempted to bury a Windrush report, a report on the Windrush, or the Home Office scandal, as it should be known, and the fact that racism was so deeply rooted in the origins of the scandal, which we all knew. I'm so sorry. Episode 111 and 112, if you want to know more about the Windrush scandal. I'm not going to go into the background of it. I think I've been talking for long enough already today. But I did want to link it to this, especially with this kind of moment and where we are in 2024. Now, the report that was done by Wendy Williams came out in 2020 March. Now, if you remember, and I said this in the episode, like I can literally remember saying it with my face to the microphone, March 2020, we were thinking about lockdown, we were thinking about COVID, nobody was thinking about the Windrush scandal. Unfortunately, obviously the people that were majorly affected by it probably couldn't help but think about it. But the majority of the country, public awareness and consciousness, was thinking about COVID-19, the uncertainty, this 3-week lockdown that Boris Johnson said was going to be 3 weeks, but we all knew, or we all should have known that it was never just going to be 3 weeks. We were thinking about that at the end of March 2020, not about the Windrush. And they plopped the report out, right, in the midst of a global pandemic, a scandal. It really does infuriate me. But now, it's Black History Month. And the fact that this is breaking in Black History Month is sensational to me, because actually it's kind of only time of the year where the majority of people that are going to ever care about, issues to do with race and Black history turn their heads to these things. So it's going to be great, and I can't wait to talk about it in every single talk I do this month. Sorry if you've booked me. This is the topic. It's changed. But this new report is due to come out on Thursday, or iterations of what was initially said. But what was said was that legislation, and I quote, was designed to reduce the proportion of people living in the United Kingdom who did not have white skin, end quote. They were deliberately trying to remove and lessen the numbers of Black and brown people that lived in this country. It was deliberate. I used to just have to say that, right, with my own, I think. Now I don't have to just think. I know it's been said. And the fact that the Home Office really tried to hide this report shows that, it can't have just been a mistake, because if it was a mistake, if it was just an error, if it was just a really unfortunate situation, then they would do everything they can to rectify it. They would say, look, this is what's happened. We are so sorry. We've got to fix it. Everybody take the compensation that you're owed and you need. But no, they've dragged their feet with the compensation. They've been underpaying people and proposing really preposterous amounts of money for people that have gone through hell, right? And now we know that it was actually a deliberate scheme to just lessen the numbers of non-white people in this country, which completely feeds into the climate of 2024. And, this wasn't even coming out in 2024. So as people are asking, well, the report, the Windrush report that came out in 2020 was called Lessons Learned. Well, what lessons have been learned? None. There were no lessons to be learned because it was a malicious and deliberate policy. It was a deliberate piece of legislation. So there's no need for any lessons to be learned because it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an error. It wasn't a logistical issue. It wasn't, just so happened that these landing cards had been removed from the office that they were in and destroyed accidentally. It was a deliberate thing. So I look forward to more information about that, I believe, on Thursday. Thursday will be the 2nd, 3rd of October. More information will be coming out about that. I might do an episode about it. I probably won't, though, only because I've actually got some really good episodes queued up and ready for you. And I'm fed up of talking about the Home Office scandal. I am, really, really fed up of it, to be honest, and the racism in this country at all levels, whether it's the far right, whether it's in policing, whether it's in the education system, in government. It's just too much now. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about today, but just so interesting that, we're kind of repeating history here with the fact that these Jamaican teachers are coming over to take the jobs that British people don't want to do. Yet at the same time, we're uncovering, government, Home Office, probably one of the biggest institutions in this country when it comes to thinking about racism, and immigration, which feeds so deeply and clearly into that. Is clearly guilty of some abhorrent activities in the past. Now, this disclosure of this report should have come out time ago, realistically, and it's actually the fact that there have been so many Freedom of Information Acts that have been rejected because the Home Office decided that it would threaten the existence of a, and I quote, safe space within the department to discuss immigration policy, and it would also be politically embarrassing for them. And a man called James Coombs, a transparency campaigner and an IT worker for a mobile phone company who's cited in the Guardian article that I will link in the show notes, took the case to the Information Commissioner, arguing that the Home Office was delaying responding because of this information being, and I quote, politically embarrassing. His request was rejected, but he won an appeal, and he cited Orwell's views on government's attempt to control information, as well as the philosopher George Santayana, who you often hear about when we think about the Holocaust, who said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I can't forget that quote. It's something that you learn a lot about in school, I think, this idea of the past repeating itself. And it's just so interesting that of the things I've chosen to talk about today are just 2 examples of the past repeating themselves again and again. The report takes a longer history of immigration policy in this country, and they pinpoint this period of 1950 to 1981 when thinking about the fact that immigration policy was designed to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin who were permitted to live and work in the UK, and that's a quote. So we're thinking about this kind of period, this like 1950 to 1981, where there's probably quite a lot in comparison to other times, this post-war moment, where there is just so much immigration regulation and change coming in, which is a point of contention for newly arrived people that are often protesting it in this time, especially in the 60s and 70s. And so this is kind of where the beginnings are of this reduction of non-white people in Britain. And, you know, these are the same people that then were targeted in the 2020s, is that what they're called? The early 2000s and the 2010s, you know, faced with these illegal deportations because they were allegedly not allowed to be here. So it's interesting that one of the lessons that Wendy Williams proposed was that Home Office staff be trained in Britain's colonial history, histories of empire, histories of migration in Britain. And that was one of the clear kind of, you know, here's my report, here's my recommendations, you know, you need to do this. That was one of the clear things that was suggested. And actually, you know, it comes down to this in this long history of things that these people should have and probably maybe now have been educated on, is where this racist policy kind of begins and where we start to see it rearing its ugly head in the Home Office and in immigration policy of this time. So basically, the long and short story is we should all know our history a little bit better. That's the end. All go and do a history degree. I'm joking. But no, knowing this stuff and knowing, you know, why things are the way they are and why society looks the way it does today and why the political sphere is how it is so interesting and so important to understand some of these bigger issues that we seem to be faced with more and more in the 21st century. That is all I have time for today. I think I've made enough links. I think I've spun enough immigration, historical, and, you know, newly arrived people from the Caribbean webs. I hope that, you know, if you want to learn more about the Windrush scandal, which I think, it just rolls off the tongue as Windrush scandal now, and I hate that because it's nothing to do with the Windrush, actually. It's the Home Office scandal. It was their mess up. Episode 111 and 112 to know more about that. Episode 6 and episode 50 if you want to hear a rant about Black History Month or 2. And also episode 80 and 81. Those were episodes that came out around the Windrush Day, which is in June 22nd, and looks at the kind of futility of quote unquote celebrating a day like that in the context of this Home Office scandal and the fact that so many people of Caribbean descent, elderly Caribbean people, were still, you know, really suffering at the hands of this racism of the Home Office, as we can now call it with chest. Anyway, that is really all for now. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.